Power 102 Digital. Hard Talk starts now with host Fareed Ali. And of course, we got a very special guest in a continuing series, if I can call it that, or a continuing saga of the 1970 revolution, the Black Power movement, and its relevance to Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean by extension. Good afternoon, Fareed, and good afternoon to our special guest. I'll allow you to introduce your guest.
Good afternoon again, David. Welcome, Mr. Mohini. Um, to the listening public, we have a continued series today. Today is a follow-up program from where we started last week. We are discussing the 1970 revolution, the Black Power movement, um, and we have no other than one Mr. Mbao Mohini sharing with us his views. Mr. Mohini is no stranger to Trinidad and Tobago. He has been involved um, in government and out of government, in office, out of office, and pro Trinidad and Tobago in so many ways. He served through the years in a number of capacities. For those of you all who missed the first part of the program last week, Mr. Mohini represented the people of Trinidad and Tobago at conferences in Kenya. That is the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, Nairobi in 2010. Further to that, Columbia Organization of American States, OAS Medal in 2011, and many others. Mr. Mohini, thank you again for being here with us. How are you doing today?
Very good, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
We had an interesting discussion that we began last week, and I want us to continue where we left off, but not only that, to hear from you who were basically a man on the ground. You would have been a much younger version of yourself. Today you would be wiser, but in those days you would have had a wise input in terms of what was happening. Just for the sake of clarity, if it is we disconnect in any way, given that it's a virtual discussion we're having here, I'm having some internet difficulties on my end. In this moment, it seems to be perfect. But if I in any way I'm disconnected, I'll just rejoin. So don't run away, Mr. Mohini, if that happens.
I won't.
Okay. So where we were last week, we were talking about the march. We had gotten to that point where you were discussing that NJAC in mobilizing the people on the ground. You were about uniting people despite or in spite of race relations. NJAC more or less operated beyond the narrative of race. NJAC was about bringing the people together, and so it involved not only just the trade union movements, but it involved the sugar workers. It incorporated the persons who worked in oil. Let's get back to that point. You said the march, you all ventured into Carney and then went beyond into Couva, which is the heartland, and you had public discussions there. I'm taking you back to where we were. Walk us through what was the spirit of that march? What did you all intend to achieve?
Okay, that was a march for national unity. Okay, and as what happened when NJAC is there, we also were pursuing whatever upliftment, transformation, enlightenment, you name it. And that is why at the Couva car park, that night, a People's Parliament was held. But I would need to deal with the question of the People's Parliament, because that is such an essential aspect of the whole movement of 1970, and it fits tightly into NJAC's philosophy of people's participation and people's power. Because so strong was the organization where the people's participation is concerned, that the first demonstration in 1970 would have been on the 26th of February. A mere 6 days after that, on the 4th of March, the first People's Parliament was held in Woodford Square. And with the People's Parliament, each and every individual had an equal right to speak, to to give their points of view, as well as to define what they believe should be done in terms of taking the country forward, in terms of having better communities, what have you. Regardless of your station in life, regardless of your wealth, regardless of your education, each person had an equal right to speak. And that first parliament was held at Woodford Square a mere 6 days after the first demonstration on the 26th of February. And then beyond that, that was the 4th of March. On the 7th of March, Woodford Square was renamed the People's Parliament of Woodford Square. And that name it held for quite a while. But a lot of the persons in this generation are not aware of that naming or renaming of Woodford Square. And so much so did it function as a parliament that nightly citizens gathered at Woodford Square, discussed issues involving their communities, took decisions, and implemented them. And not only that, there was a notice board up in Woodford Square that recorded the decisions of each parliament on a nightly basis, so that persons passing through Woodford Square the following day would see the discussions that took place, as well as the decisions that were made. And as I pointed out last week, the parliament that was held in the Hoover car park took a decision that the sugar industry must be brought under local control. And in 1975, that decision of the Parliament of 12 March 1970 became a reality with the emergence of Caroni Trinidad Limited. Okay, so that is important. But you mentioned the demonstrations as well, and I would like to point out, because we need to appreciate that the demonstration involved more than just walking up and down Trinidad and Tobago in the thousands that would have been there, shouting power to the people. NJAC's objective was more than just saying, okay, People's Parliament, the population could be involved. NJAC launched a mass education and enlightenment program. So the demonstration was one part of that program. As a matter of fact, the demonstration has been described as a school, because as the thousands were marching, whether it's from Port of Spain to Samoa, to Curep, to Diego Martin, to Caroni, to Cuba, wherever it may be, the leadership of the organization used that as an opportunity to enlighten the population. And as such, not only would we have one microphone, but there were a number of microphones, sometimes 5, 6, 7, depending on the size of the demonstration. And at the same time, you are going to have 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 meetings taking place at the same time, different parts of the demonstration, with speakers dealing with diverse topics, whether it is politics, whether it's economics, family life, youth, woman development. The range had no limit. So the demonstration was used for that purpose. The meetings, the mass public meetings that were being held nightly in different parts of the country were also used for a similar purpose. And the chief servant, Macandla Daga, then Geddes Granger, exhorted his speakers to recognize 3 areas of importance for any good speech. First of all, he said, you must be educational. You must bring some information, some ideas that that would help the population to understand their situation and make decisions. Okay, so it must be educational. It must also be uplifting. In other words, someone who comes to a meeting, at the end of it, they should leave there with some idea of how to make their life better, how to make their community better. All right. And thirdly, it must agitate. In other words, once you come to the meeting, it must inspire and motivate you to do something, big or small, to make your family, your community, and your nation a better place. It must motivate people to become more purposeful in their lives, right? And I should go beyond that as well to continue or to show you other areas outside of the meetings, the demonstrations, etc. Because the organization, recognizing the importance of enlightenment, brought in thousands of books which were sold throughout the country, again dealing with varied areas of national life, different authors, whether it be Fanon, Mahatma Gandhi, Malcolm X, you name it, right? And these books were brought in. And something very positive was happening as well. Because the young person, because thousands of the youths were coming into the demonstration, as well as workers, elders, you name it. And a lot of the blocks of the youths had been on the blocks in somewhat antisocial life. But during that period, the blocks were transformed from negative environments to positive environments, where the youths will leave the blocks during the day, take part in the demonstrations, and in the evening, they will be reading our pamphlets, our newspapers. They'll be reading the books. They were sharing between them, right? Because one might buy a book, lend it to the other. That kind of situation was developing. And then they were also using that gathering to plan to do something for the demonstration the next day. Because you are talking about 55 days of demonstrations all over Trinidad and Tobago. So some of them will be doing up placards, posters, what have you, getting involved. It was a people's movement. And this is why it has been said that the people were the revolution, and the revolution, the people, right? You had the leaders, but the masses were just taking place. As a matter of fact, right? As a matter of fact, they developed a system. They didn't have a name for it, but I call it the each one teach one. So that those who are now coming into the movement would have been taught by those who knew a little more. And those who knew a little more themselves were being taught by those who knew more, and the chain going right up. So that was the kind of situation, right? It was a movement to enlighten, to educate. As new groupings were being set up in different parts of the country, one of the first tasks that a new group was given was to bring out their own area paper. Okay, so you had the Liberation, which was the national paper, but after a while, you had a number of communities, Superior Speaks, the Voice of Tobago, Lavantil, etc., all different areas beginning to bring out their papers. It meant that within the community, people had to research their own community, see what were the problems, what were the ills, etc., and then bring it to the national community through their paper. It meant that new persons had to learn to write, new leaders had to emerge. And this is the kind of mass situation that was taking place in 1970. And I could recall quite clearly, it would have been possibly 3 to 4 weeks after the 26th of February first demonstration, we began to hear people speaking, different parts of the country, about the new consciousness. In other words, a whole new consciousness was emerging among the population. And this is why you had a situation arising as I described, where one could say the people became the revolution. Okay?
Let me ask you this.
Before you ask him
Yeah.
that, Chief, what I'll appreciate for the accuracy of the information that you are sharing, I am begging you, sir, to please use Geddes Granger when referring to that era, because the evolution brought to Makandal Dagger, that progression came to Makandal Dagger. So just for the information of the people who are listening, especially younger people who are listening, could you kindly use Geddes Granger of that era, so that in case they have to write a paper or they have to refer to that era, they would not put Makandal Daga. All right. I just need you to do that for
Okay.
accuracy. All right.
Okay. Well, and I agree with you that up to 1973, his name would have been Geddes Granger. But in
Yeah.
1973, he changed it legally to Makandal Daga.
Yeah.
And that is the name of his choice, as just as many other members have chosen whatever names that they believe are appropriate. In many cases, African names, as well as in other cases, other ethnic groups began to do likewise. So it was not just African who changed their name during that period.
Yeah.
And when one changes their name, you know, it is because they have a deep appreciation for their identity.
Yes.
And so this is why we use it, and we use it even continuously.
Yeah.
But I agree that the public needs to know that
Yes.
his name at that time was Geddes Granger.
Yes. Yes. And the beauty about that era and that change, it brought about that consciousness that is even being used up to today, even though we find that there's a sort of lack of commitment to affiliate themselves or ourselves, if I should talk in general, of
Right.
that effort and that is sort of a build up to our consciousness.
No, but it brings me to a very interesting experience I had when I was at the headquarters. It would have been somewhere a bit about 1989, 1991, somewhere in that period, when the principal of Bishop Anstey called Geddes Granger, who was then by then Makandal Daga, and told him, he said, Mr. Daga, you have won. More than 50% of the students of Bishop Anstey now have an African name. You know? And that was a very heartening piece of communication that he received and that we received at the headquarters around that period. You know, that someone could actually call, you know, and express their happiness, their joy in seeing that transformation that had taken place with the number of persons taking African names.
Yes. Yes. Farid?
Shed some light for us, Mr. Mohini. What the world understood as the Black Power movement in the US. What was I gather that what was Black Power considered Black Power in the late 60s in the US, and what we
Yes.
call Black Power here, it didn't fall on all four squares, meaning that it's not a direct replication of what was going on in the US here. Black Power, in my view, and this is the correction I'm seeking from you,
Yes.
Black Power in the US was about the empowerment of Afro-Americans, right? Where they became more conscious of themselves, yes, and wanted a greater sane representation and were fighting for enfranchisement and civil rights and so on. But here in the Caribbean, where we had become independent in 1962, by the late 60s, we were already in control of our own destiny. We would have been making decisions. We weren't a Republican state as yet, but we were making decisions. So there was a certain level of Black Power that had came into fruition in 1962. Touch on that with me, because from what you're explaining and from what we've gathered from you so far, and Jack was about bringing the people of Trinidad and Tobago together, not just Black as in Afro-Trinidadian, but Black as in all Black people, Indo-Trinidadian, Afro-Trinidadian, the Chinese, and everyone, meaning the other minority sect, if I may use that term. So in reality, Black Power for us Trinidadians would have been a coming together of all our peoples, regardless of their ethnic origin. It wasn't something about Africa alone. Could you bring some clarity there?
Yes, definitely. Because what we said underline the movement. We were first and foremost concerned about building what we would have called a new and just society, with all the other components that would have gone with it. Because you mentioned the question of independence, and we don't believe that a country could be truly independent just within a political framework where you have your parliament now, you have a prime minister, you have a senate, what have you. That is not enough. Unless you have economic power, you cannot truly and really and truly be independent. And this is why one of the main slogans in 1970 was, we do not want crumbs, we want the whole bread. We want control of the commanding heights of the economy, right? Not necessarily the little petty businesses. We are talking about the commanding heights of the economy. For example, we boast about having 2 oil booms in this country. That could not have been had it not been for that people's movement of 1970. Because in 1970, 96% of the oil wealth was leaving the country. And it is NJAC and the masses who demanded that we must be in control of the oil industry. I spoke about the sugar industry with the parliament that was held at the Couva car park, as well as manufacturing, as well as land. For example, in Tobago, where I am from, in 1970, we got the government to take control of 13 of the largest estates in Tobago. Because Tobago at that time was largely agricultural. Tobago used to export 300,000 pounds of gum provision, a vast amount of avocados, over 1 million pounds of pigeon peas. Tobago was depending on agriculture. Yet, some of it would have been the local people working with an arrangement with the landowners, because approximately 71% of Tobago's best land was in the hands of foreigners in 1970. And it is that movement again that transformed that, or began the transformation of that in 1970. So the point I'm making is that the movement was very much concerned about the control of our resources. But we were saying as well that people must be proud of their heritage, of their culture, of their identity. And the slave experience, slavery and colonialism, had decimated the Africans' culture. We lost our names, we lost our religions, we lost more than I could explain at this point in time. And other ethnic groups suffered losses as well. So the movement was to, in a way, we talk about reparations, but this would have been a different type of reparations, a different type of repairing oneself, repairing one's community, rebuilding your identity, and recreating that confidence that we need to have as a people.
Okay. So it would be correct to say that what we term the Black Power Revolution of 1970, if we were to borrow the Eurocentric term, it was really a revolution of people of color, not just Afro-Blacks, but Indo, Chinese, and other ethnicities.
It was a people revolution. The first name it was called was the February Revolution, because the first demonstration was on the 26th of February. I told you as well last week that NJAC was formed on the 26th of February 1969. The mass movement was launched on the 26th of February 1970. And therefore, the first name it got was the 26th February, the February Revolution. Then you had the the Trinidad and Tobago Revolution, because on the 21st of April, you had the army rebellion. And then eventually, you had some persons beginning to call it the Black Power Revolution. So those are three different names that have been used. And in some cases, some of them are still used, you know. But as I pointed out, there were specific areas and specific objectives. Yes, as a people, we're supposed to reclaim our culture, our identity, etc., our pride, and that was important. But if we are truly to be independent, we need to have not just a voice in parliament, but we need to be able to control the commanding heights of the economy.
Yeah. So when we heard about, when you spoke about NJAC made a call for national unity,
Yes,
that clarion call for national unity, the young person of today, a contemporary of 2024, would associate that national unity call with perhaps the UNC or perhaps the PNM. But NJAC really made that call as far back as 1970.
definitely.
You all were the forerunners for national unity in its essence.
Yes, it was a demand for national unity. And at least, even though we were not able to take it as far as we would have liked, because, as I said, you had 55 days of demonstrations, and then we had a state of emergency being declared, where demonstrations became unlawful. And so it sort of dented the movement forward. But by then, the consciousness had been
Yeah.
spread far and wide, not
But
only in Trinidad and Tobago, but also up the Caribbean. As a
it
matter of
seems that
fact,
it seems
as
that
a
the
matter
PNM it seems that the PNM and the UNC would have piggybacked on some of the philosophies that were set in place by NJAC in those early years.
the point about it, as I said, is that those ideas and the philosophies that were introduced became cemented to different degrees, became accepted to different degrees. It gave the population a new confidence as well, right? Because they talk about the PNM and the UNC. The nation would have benefited, the Caribbean would have benefited. And so impactful was that call for a new society, that call for transformation, that even before the declaration of the state of emergency, a delegation of NJAC speakers who were supposed to go to Barbados were banned. I can't remember the exact date, but that would have been in possibly April 1970. They were banned, and well, the movement also banned the Barbadian Prime Minister from coming here. If we can't go there, you can't come here either. I know that Macandal Daga Geddes Granger was one, Kafa Kaban, Dave Dabo at that time, as well as Clyde Nunez, you know. They were banned from entering Barbados to host a meeting that they were invited to speak at. Mm-hmm. So that is the point. That is the point I'm making. And it spread up the Caribbean. Mm-hmm. And if I can go further to state that that effort to transform the society, as I pointed out with the Enlightenment, the establishment of the parliaments, okay, but it went beyond that in terms of striving to enlighten our youth, right? As a matter of fact, NJAC was looking at the youth, looking at the women, all right, and our women and our youth were taking part in that movement for change in 1970. Okay, so much so that one of the NJAC's slogans was "Old and young, all belong in the new society." Old and young, all belong in the new society, and that society did not begin or would have begun from the very outset of the movement, so that you had the youths participating, you had the women participating, you had the men participating. And one of the first principles outlined by NJAC was honor the old, because we recognize the importance of respecting those who came before us and who paved the way that we could be walking after they had departed, or in there while they were senior citizens, I should say, right? And that is the kind of approach that we had. Okay, we saw the women as the custodians of life and culture within the society. They are the ones who would have nurtured the younger ones in the home and would have played that role. So there was like respect and elevate the woman, right? Prepare and build the youth, love the children. Okay. So these are some of the, you see, what I'm trying to get across is that the approach was people oriented. All right. And this is why the chief servant also said in 1972, Geddes Granger, Makandal Daga, right? In 1972, he said, we want a society that is whose basis is not money and property and capital, but whose basis is man, is people, right? And using that approach, right? And one of the principles that we also had in 1970, right, was unite the nation, build the nation, okay? And also, most importantly, be a brother, be a sister. So right across the country, when people met a young man or a woman or what have you, how are you my sister, how are you my brother? The nation itself was redefined as a family, right? And coming out of that redefinition of the nation, people began to express more love and togetherness between themselves, which led to a historic record, right, that should be put up somewhere that the nation could see, that in 1970, after spending only 55 days of mobilization on the streets of this country, and then what the organization would have done after the emergency was lifted on the 20th of November, good, when we had our rededication process to rededicate the lives of NJAC and the people to that new society, okay, with that limited period to operate, we were able to motivate and instill a reduction in the level of crime by 56%, more than half. It's a record, right?
Let me get a comment from you on this. I was, in my little research that I was doing, I read here that one of the achievements of the 1970 revolution, the Black Power Revolution. I'm quoting here from the Triad Express. An article that I got from the 12th of December 2020. It says here, under the rubric of equality and justice. Equality and justice meaning that this is one of the achievements of the Black Power movement. It says here that the revolution also addressed the institutional racism. In Tobago, for instance, the Mount Irving Bay Hotel and the Golf Club were open to non-whites in the aftermath of 1970. So it seemed that Mount Irving Bay Hotel and the Golf Club in Tobago were more or less exclusively frequented, or the exclusive domain of whites. After 1970, Mount Irving and the Golf Club became open to people of all color. It goes on to say that the fence at Bacalet Bay, which was erected by Blue Haven Hotel to secure the beach as a restricted area for tourists, was cut and steps built to give access to the public. So when you had beaches that were exclusive to whites alone, after 1970, and the philosophy and the teachings arising out of 1970 led to a certain level of what we may call on a limited scale here, desegregation. What was treated as strictly for whites now became open to everyone. The beaches were open in Tobago. restricted beaches, that is, not all. And it
Right.
goes on to say that the local white community also benefited, not just the people of color. The local white community benefited from the 1970 revolution. They obtained many senior positions vacated by the expatriates who departed or shores during the mass people's movement. So local whites who would have been secondary to the foreign expats who were occupying key positions in the commanding heights of our economy. When those foreign expats left after the people's movement, local whites would have benefited. They would have they would have gotten an opportunity to take up positions that would not have been theirs to take, but for what happened in 1970. So 1970 was really, from what I'm reading here, if this is interpreted correctly, it was really a people thing, and not necessarily strictly for an exclusive Afro-Trinidadian thing. Whites were benefiting, the Indians and the Chinese were benefiting also. This was really a nation thing.
Yeah, definitely so. Definitely so, But there are those who want us to believe otherwise, that was just for Africans alone, that was all about, Africans and African and black. And, it was a lot more than that. Yes, we were saying our people must be proud. Yes, we must say that the Indians must be proud as well, that all ethnic groups, all peoples should be proud of their history and their culture. But we were saying that we need to transform our society, right, in such a way that the emphasis would be developing the resources so that each and everyone could benefit, based on whatever wealth exists. You spoke about Mount Irving, right? Bay Hotel. And that hotel was operated strictly on race. Non-whites were only allowed onto those compounds if you are a caddy boy in the golf course, a waitress or servant in the hotel, right? Or if you were performing some other function like that. Outside of that, it was strictly for non-African, non-black, right? It was strictly for whites. And we were able to transform that. As a matter of fact, there was a massive demonstration of about 5,000 persons who went down there on I think it would be 3rd of April, right? And raised an objection to the racist policies that were being carried out by the hotel. And not only that, they were also disrespecting the independence of Trinidad and Tobago. Because as you would know, right, you can't come into a country because it was foreign owned as well, and place a foreign flag above the national flag of the country in which you are. And that was going on in Mount Irving, right? No need to say that during that demonstration, that flag was taken down, right? And we sent a clear message that they need to respect the independent nation of Trinidad and Tobago in terms of the protocols that they observe. So that demonstration was really the beginning of that movement towards having Mount Irving, which is now locally owned, one, remove their racist policies, as well as finally to become under local ownership. As well, same thing I spoke about the beach. A demonstration had passed there, right? Pointing out that the barring off of a beach is illegal. There must be access, as a result of which they had to cut the fence and place steps for the public. Prior to that, that whole area was totally barred off, and the beach was the exclusive reserve of those tourists who were staying at the Blue Haven Hotel.
You're saying that, I just being the devil's advocate here.
Sure.
Some years ago, perhaps about 10 years ago, I was in Tobago. I saw callaloo and crab and dumplings selling from a certain establishment. So I joined the line. When
Yes.
I got, the line was essentially, let me put it this way, it was essentially foreigners,
Good.
tourists.
Good.
When I got to the top of the line, a man my color tell me he can't sell me.
My goodness. So we have gone the whole circle, the entire circle.
I think he was paid. The people were paying in US and I was paying in TT. So my money wasn't good enough.
Boy.
But that probably wasn't a throwback from 1970. That probably was just a price myself on the market.
All right.
But,
oh my gosh.
But in keeping what you're saying also, I want to make this point. I'm reading here again. Many nationals gained elevation within the church hierarchy during the 1970s. For example, a fair number of nationals were elevated in the Anglican Church during and after 1970, including Clive Abdullah, who also became the first African bishop of the Anglican Church in Trinidad and Tobago in September 1970.
Yes.
I think I could go so far to say that Archbishop Anthony Pantin, that introduction of locals holding key positions in the church, all of these things, not just in the Anglican Church but in the Catholic Church, all of this would have spiraled out of 1970. They would have definitely drawn on local priests to head the church and local priests to assume key positions, as opposed to I would imagine the Catholic Church sending priests of a different orientation from Ireland and from different parts of Europe and so on.
Okay, gentlemen, I need you to stick a pin. I have a participant on the phone here. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good evening.
Good afternoon.
Good evening. Good evening, madam.
Good evening. Good evening.
Are you there?
Hi, I wanted to NLTV program is this it?
Say that again.
It has a promotion with NLTV.
Oh. No, well, I think you're on the wrong station. Probably should try Boom Champions. You call the front desk at 62 Power, and you can link up with Boom Champions. Okay, sorry, gentlemen, let's continue.
Right. So, Mr. Moheni, we had members of the clergy being drawn from our local ranks. So even at the church level, at the ecclesiastical level, there were changes. So such was the Black Power movement, that the impact was not just ideological, but in a very real way. Our citizens were coming to the forefront and assuming positions in middle management and higher management.
Yes,
in various sectors, including the church.
Yeah, definitely so. You know, a lot of changes would have been made. You mentioned Bishop Abdullah. That was one, but he also had the first non-white police commissioner. It was in a number of different areas, as well as nationals of Trinidad and Tobago were given greater prominence in their own country, coming out of that 1970 experience. You had, for example, the first non-white, Philip Rushford, to become the chief executive officer in a commercial bank, which happened in 1970 as well. All right.
That's the National Commercial Bank.
National Commercial Bank, which morphed and is now First Citizens after it joined up with the Workers' Bank and the Cooperative Bank. Okay, so these are just some of the contributions that NJAC made, but NJAC also made, if I could continue with some of the achievements of the movement, okay, the NJAC also contributed to the development of that consciousness in different parts of the Caribbean through the participation of various individuals from various parts of the Caribbean on what would have been called the Caribbean Steering Committee, headed by the Chief Servant Macandal Dagger, then Geddes Granger. Okay, and if we want to look at some of the names, you had people like Roosevelt, or Rosie Douglas, as he was called, who became Prime Minister of Dominica subsequent to being on the Caribbean Steering Committee. You had people like Trevor Monroe from Jamaica, UC Quayana from Guyana, Tim Hector of Antigua, Raymond Charlotte from French Guiana, Maurice Bishop from Grenada, who also later became Prime Minister of Grenada. So you had persons from different parts of the Caribbean coming together, right, under the steering, the Caribbean Liberation Steering Committee, which was chaired by the chief servant, Mark Andreldak, working out ways in which to not only build a better island here or island there, but to build a better Caribbean with better coordination. As a matter of fact, it is out of that movement and the demands of NJAC in Trinidad and Tobago and the students, right, who had some of their own demonstrations as well. Okay, and coming out of that, there were demands that we have our own examination rather than depending on Cambridge and London. And out of it would have been born in April 1972 the Caribbean Examinations Council, from which millions, that's crossing, it's into the millions now, of youths and children or students throughout the Caribbean have benefited from an education that would have been more relevant to the Caribbean, right? And to the what should be the aims and objectives of building a better Caribbean. So that is also one of the achievements of that movement of 1970. Again, when was it set up? You just go back and do the numbers. 1972, Caribbean Examinations Council came into being. And we turned to Trinidad and Tobago. And there had been some discussions about setting up a national insurance board or national insurance scheme or whatever it may be. But in 1970, NJAC took a position that any government that cannot insure its own people should not have passed the qualifications, then that should not exist, does not, value itself sufficiently to exist if you cannot value your own people by at least providing a system of insurance. And again, the National Insurance Board would have been set up in 1971. Again, you just have to go back and do the numbers, and you will see the impact of that movement of 1970. You spoke about the Catholic Church and you spoke about the Anglican bishop, but it is coming out of that movement that even the Orisha gained national legality, became a legally practicing religion coming out of that movement of the 1970s.
I read where Trinidad and Tobago was the first nation outside of Africa or outside of the African continent to give legal recognition to African religions with the passage of the Act for the Incorporation of the Orisha movement of Trinidad and Tobago in 1981.
Yes.
So we, NJAC and Trinidad and Tobago have really demonstrated to the world that we were, more all-inclusive or more inclusive, and than the rest of the world would have been. Meaning we would have laid the footpath, or as we say in Trinidad, we make a road for Guti to run.
Definitely.
One of the things that I read also is that NJAC established in 1982 the Institute of Race Relations to help build better race relations in Trinidad and Tobago. Among those who gave sterling services, and it went on to mention Liseli Daga and various persons who would have contributed in some way, Archbishop Anthony Pantin,
yes,
Bishop Clyde Abdullah, Noble Khan, former Senator Jawara Mobata, former president of the Institute of Race Relations. So NJAC has been involved in just about every aspect. When I read after the PNM had lost the election to the NAR in 1986, and Manning took control of the PNM and brought it back from the dead, and they assumed government again in 91. One of the first things Manning had set up was the Center for Ethnic Studies
Right.
But the Center for Ethnic Studies sound like some new development when Manning was just giving a different name to something that NJAC had already been the forerunner of, which is the Institute of Race Relations as far back as 1982. So what Manning did in 91 was just add a new acronym to something that NJAC would have been the forerunner to 10 years before.
Definitely. And that Institute of Race Relations did human service throughout the country. Okay, different teams going to different schools, speaking to the students. There was a point in time where they uh, interfaced with churches across the country and got them to include in their sermons messages for national unity, because the politics still had race in it, and Jack recognizing the heat that was rising in terms of race relations got a number of the religious bodies throughout the country to begin to speak to their flock and thereby begin to restore the balance. Um, and you mentioned Archbishop Pantin. I have to also inform that he served as the PRO, right, for a number of years up to his passing. All right. And we sought to get representation from all ethnic groups in getting across that message that we are one nation and one people. And if we want to build a better Trinidad and Tobago, proper, positive, and uplifting race relations is absolutely important.
One of the things that I've read, and maybe you can comment in this area, in terms of entrepreneurship. I'm reading here the same article, the Express, December 12th, 2020. It was stated here the new consciousness also inspired the birth of the Drag Brothers on Frederick Street in 1970. They began to make bags, sandals, and other leather items which they sold on the drag which is Frederick Street. This early initiative developed into full-blown revolution in the distribution of business ownership in TNT. It gave rise to the people sector, which opened the doors for thousands of persons who had no business opportunities prior to the revolution of 1917. So what we know to be the drag mall, where locally people would go there and buy handcraft and buy art and things that are synonymous with uh, regional culture or local culture.
Right.
This was also a byproduct of 1970. For those of us who were born in years after, many years after, we would not have known the root of the drag mall.
Definitely so. Okay, because NJAC was reinstilling in our people that sense of independence, that sense of self-reliance, and having within the communities people strive to use their skills, right? The sandals makers, the bag makers, the tailors, the seamstresses, what have you. Okay, that was one of the byproducts of that whole movement of 1970. And some of the brothers began to make their sandals and their bags and what have you, and go down Frederick Street, which we used to call the drag. So out of it came the drag brothers. But not only did the drag brothers emerge, you also had a whole people's sector emerging out of that movement of 1970. Because prior to 1970, the talk all over was black people can't run business. Okay, that was the talk, and not only that, it was backed up by the financial sector that would not give African people, and in many cases Indians as well, loans to set up their own business. So that the only businesses that the Africans could have, well, I would say the only, but the majority of businesses would be just a little sell a little this whatever produce you have on the land, basic um, level stuff. But that movement of 1970 began to motivate and inspire persons to get into business. Hence, 1970 was named the year of small business, right? Because a lot of small businesses began to emerge, not only on the drag of Frederick Street in Port-au-Spain, but throughout Trinidad and Tobago. And in addition to that, that theme of togetherness, of working together, of cooperating, led to 1971 being titled the year of the cooperative, right? Because not only were people going into business, but in many cases, they were going in as teams, setting up cooperatives and working, sharing their experiences, sharing their knowledge, sharing their skills to build these institutions. But we were also saying, support those institutions that you already have, right? And in the decade of the 1972, that would have been named the year of the credit union, right? And I must say that the decade of the 1970s saw the capital base of the credit union movement growing by approximately 1,000%. Okay, so that there's so much history of that period that the population needs to look at. For instance, the question of crime, as I mentioned before, we were able to reduce crime by over 50%, right? But today, who is coming to NJAC to say, what are your views, right? And we need to tap. Well, as a matter of fact, what we did then is we tapped the intelligence of the masses by respecting the masses. You had emerging what was described back then as the collective intelligence or the collective genius of the masses of people. Right? And that collective genius expressed itself in the people's parliaments that was set up in different parts of Trinidad as well as in different parts of Tobago, where the members of the various communities could get together, discuss their problems, and come up with solutions. Okay? So that is what would have created that environment that would have birthed what we call the Trinidad and Tobago Revolution. And the fact, as I said before, that the revolution was the people was the revolution.
What was life at the university campus was? Because you were part of that.
No, I was not part of that campus experience.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I was not part of that campus experience. You'd have had people like the chief servant would have been there, Macandel Dagger, Kafa Kamban, then Dave Dabo, Aigo Ome, then Dave Murray. Okay. You'd have had that. They would have been there, but I was not there. Okay. But I would have picked up when the movement came to Tobago, actually.
Tell me something. I want to say something here. I hope it's not offensive either. It's not in any way to discredit any sort of a person or group per
Right.
se. But you know, the impact and the relevant changes that NJAC brought about to the governance of Trinidad and Tobago. Sometimes it's I don't want to use a powerful word as unacceptable to note that we never had since 1956 or somewhere they're coming up, we never had a Caucasian prime minister. We've always had people of that ethnic background, you know, Africans, and then we had the Indians and stuff.
Right.
What I'm saying is that based on all the efforts and the work that NJAC put into the methods of governance, and they have practiced and put into place some with different titles, if I should put it like that. But isn't it strange to note that the people are still not empowered in such a way as NJAC was advancing that empowerment for the people? I find it difficult to understand that even the same people who probably were not in office at the time, or who were in the parties and probably looking forward to being in office in authoritative positions, they are there now. But to me, and to based on what I hear on the ground all the time, is pressure and pressure and pressure. The pressures were alleviated based on what NJAC did within the 1970 era. All right, and they recognized that, and because of the massive support of the people and the intention of the people to ensure that things were changed, things did start to change, and we are still experiencing that level of change and acceptance for people of color, if I should put it like that. But to me, it seems as though those who are in authority now still have a kind of colonial cloak in their governance, because we still see, and even in these times, in the 20s, we are seeing where people are still impoverished. Most of the areas where we see that kind of standard of living has not improved, and we are seeing that still. So what is NJAC's stance? What is NJAC's take on? If we look back at that history, it was such a rich history. It brought about so much change. What's NJAC's position now?
The point about it is that the fact that there could have been a state of emergency on the 21st of April, where the NJAC leadership was imprisoned for 7 months, the fact that there could have been a second emergency, which hardly anyone speaks about, the 19th of October 1971, the following year, as NJAC began to mobilize again and began to gain traction, a second emergency was declared. And again, the leadership was imprisoned. The first time the leadership was imprisoned for 7 months. The second time the leadership was imprisoned for 8 months.
Yeah.
Okay? So the fact that you could have had NJAC giving its heart, its soul, its energy into creating a better society, and yet the leadership being imprisoned like that and being harassed in 1973, and I don't want to go into all the areas, but a number of trumped-up charges members were getting, being victimization. We went through a lot, but it's just all the grit and determination why we are not going to give up. But the point
all of that were done.
Yeah, but the point I've made, the point is that the point I'm making is that the fact, right, that there was that kind of pushback, that there was that kind of victimization, right, it shows that there were those who did not agree with or like what we were doing, right, and therefore they would have put countermeasures into place, right, and they have a lot more resources than NJAC, right? Pressure was brought not only on the members, but also on the members' families, right? Who passed through victimization and pressure, okay? And as I said, countermeasures were put in place, sometimes in overt ways, sometimes in very subtle ways, right? That many people would not observe, understand, or appreciate. So I am not surprised at all that we are in the situation that we are in today, right? As a matter of fact, as I said last week, at one point, Geddes Granger McCandle Dagger, the chief servant, made a pronouncement that the direction in which the country is going, the time will come when parents would not be able to protect their children. And he was called a prophet of gloom and doom. And NJAC we were described as prophets of gloom and doom. And that was way back in the 80s.
Yeah.
And today, the very concerns that he expressed in terms of the direction the society was taking and what impact it would have and what the results would be, what the harvest would be, Today we are living it. We are living it today. Okay? And it is not just because the NJAC's message of 1970, of the 70s, of the 80s, of the 90s, it's not just because the messages were not good messages, right? But the society created a certain measure of pushback and circumstantial situations, right? That has brought us and will continue to carry us down this pathway unless we pull ourselves together and chart a new course towards a new and just society.
How can we do that if we are to look at NJAC's position? I mean, it seems like they have broken the backs of the organization NJAC. You know, you guys are still there. We still have the event that you host and all of that. But could there be a resurfacing of NJAC? Is there, or are there enough strong-willed people in the
My
NJAC?
brother, all I would say is that we can place no measure, right, on the potential and the spirit of humanity and human beings. Okay? And oftentimes, when you are in the darkest moments, as they say, the darkest hour is just before the dawn. Okay? And yes, we are very much hurt, and we feel it very, very much for sometimes the trauma that the nation has to go through, right? The poverty, the crime, you name it, the disunity, sometimes the fear that people, that grows within people because of the level of crime and what have you. We feel it for our people, right? But we know, right, that once people begin to get enlightened, right, once the message begins to grow within them again, as it will, as it most definitely will, the population is going to act on its own behalf, right? Whether it is NJAC or whether it is any other organization, right? But the population are going to begin to re-instill within themselves that sense of purpose, that sense of unity, that brotherhood and sisterhood that we spoke about in 1970. You know, I had an unusual experience, right? Hosting a campaign because I contested the Martin Central seat in 2015, and speaking to the public down there, the persons who I saw began to show power were not the elders who were there in 1970 and who knew of power to the people. It was the youths. Where did that question of power to the people, how did it get in their consciousness? And I was saying, how is it that these young persons, they were not there in 1970, they did not hear the shouts of power, and yet they were the ones who were in the forefront shouting power to the people.
Was that
That
was that inspiring for NJAC to continue maybe coming together in a coalition?
that was very inspiring, all right? But most of all, what inspires us would be the pain and the suffering of our people, and the fact that we know that we have such fantastic talent, creativity, and ability in Trinidad and Tobago, right? That all our people need is that opportunity, okay, to build not only themselves, but a nation like Trinidad and Tobago that has impacted on the world, whether it's in sports, whether it's with our steel pan, the only musical invention or the only musical instrument invented in the 20th century, the steel pan, that has captured the imagination of people throughout the world. Okay. So I am confident, very confident,
Well, I look forward to that change. They say a change is gonna come. And I hope that people like you, I know there are still a bunch of you of that era that are still here that can help the youth to gravitate to the messages, as you call them, of 1970, so that we can see a turnaround in the redeveloping Trinidad and Tobago.
Definitely. And that is why we hosted our 50th anniversary conference. Well, it came 3 years late because of the COVID. It was originally scheduled for 2020. But in 2023, we hosted, which would have been last year, we hosted our 50th anniversary conference arising out of that movement of 1970, where we had a number of the participants as well as other persons speaking with papers being presented by persons from Caribbean as well as beyond the Caribbean. And that conference in itself was a source of enlightenment, of motivation, and of inspiration. And the work of that conference is not yet complete because there are going to be documentation that will be released to the public. And another thing that enhanced me is the fact that you had a number of schools represented at that conference so that the younger ones could begin to socialize themselves in an event like that, getting the history live and direct from persons like Kafa Kambon, Philip Rushford, right?
Mr. Mohini.
Yes. Yes.
Now that social media
Like Junes, Upoko from Tobago, you name it. Right? You have 31 presenters as well as Brinsley Samaru and other scholars, you know.
Yeah. Is the use of social media used, or should I say, is social media used to send the message to people in general?
Not to the extent that it ought to be, and we do intend to increase that activity. I left out the very host of the event. When I say the host, at the campus of the University of West Indies, the principal, Rosemary Bell Antoine, she gave a fantastic presentation on law. As we know, she's a renowned lawyer, and she gave a fantastic presentation on the legal aspects of the movement and the fact that after 1970, new oppressive laws were introduced. For example, you can't demonstrate without getting a permission. In 1970, you want a demonstration, you just go and say, well, look here, we're going to protest against this. You could hold demonstrations. So she gave a fantastic presentation, as well as other members of the fraternity. So that I should mention that as well. All right. And that conference, the last of it has not been seen and experienced as yet. It's still a work in progress.
Okay, thank you, Farid.
We were touching on some of the achievements. I want to read something I read here. NJAC's philosophy of inclusion. It's taken from the Express, the 21st of November, 2020. I'm reading here an article. It reflects here. Perhaps we can get a comment from you. It reflects the revolution also sought to restore our women to their true worth and value. This was expressed in another of our principles, which states to respect and elevate the woman. The woman was seen as custodians of culture, the living link between the past and the future. The women of 1970 showed great strength in the willing acceptance of their new role and responsibility as part of the movement for a better nation. They stood firm and joined the struggle with the men in pursuit of a better nation for themselves and their children. They came to the fore of the revolution and accepted, alongside the brothers, the challenge to involve in the building of a new society. If I may jump a little bit and read here, during the period of the state of emergency and the imprisonment of most of NJAC's leadership, the women showed their mettle as they stepped up with great sense of responsibility and diligence, ensuring that the work of the movement continued along a solid progressive path. So the
Definitely.
1970 revolution also involved women folk. It wasn't just a man thing.
No, definitely, definitely. Because as you rightfully said, during the state of emergency, only male participants were incarcerated or detained, as they would call it, right? But some were at the royal jail, so that detention was really prison. Some were on Nelson Island. Some were even kept in the police station or cells in Tobago, right? So that the question of that inclusion that you spoke about, we saw that as important because each and every one of us should benefit from the society. Each and every one of us should contribute, right? And there was this philosophy of inclusion, which went counter to the philosophy of the colonial era, which was one of exclusion. Okay, a privileged few would have benefited, and the rest excluded. But NJAC said no, all must be included. Old and young all belong in the new society. Prior to the movement of 1970, persons would have been judged and would have been accepted or rejected on the basis of race, good, on the basis of wealth, on the basis of education, and sometimes on the basis of gender, whether you are male or female, right? Good. So while we were saying all that old and young all belong in the new society, right? We were coming counter to a philosophy, and we were saying, regardless of a man's station in life, good, regardless of his wealth, regardless of his uh, education or his knowledge or his enlightenment, all human beings are equal and deserve equal treatment, equal opportunity, as well as a voice on those issues and those matters that are going to affect that individual's life, that individual's life a year from now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now, as well as the lives of their children and what have you, their communities. Okay?
Allow me to ask this. Williams was a historian, and Williams would have understood. He wrote Capitalism and Slavery. He was the voice of the enslaved in some way, and in terms of, I'm saying that in the context of, he recognized that slavery existed for the economic benefit of the white superstructure. He would have
Right.
recognized how the Afro individual. I'm not saying Trinidadian alone, because slavery encountered everyone in up the Caribbean. The Afro West Indian, if we may put it that way, was being
Yes.
subjugated and marginalized and undermined in so many ways. He was caused to reject his culture. He was caused to ignore his history. He was caused to even forget his history. Why wasn't Williams able to capture what NJAC was about in his own political space? Why was it that in 1969 NJAC was able to appeal to the people in a manner that the PNM from 56 to 69 could not? What it is you all had that the PNM was not offering?
You see, basically, almost, I wouldn't say almost, but far and large, the direction, the operations, the nature of a society is underpinned by philosophy. All right? And the dominant philosophy existing at that point in time, coming out of slavery and colonialism, the dominant philosophy would have been one of, as I said, privilege and non privilege, one of inclusion and exclusion. right? So NJAC was coming with a whole new philosophy, right? We were saying we were going against the currents and the flows that was taking place almost on the global stage, right? When we were saying that someone should not be treated, right, in a different way simply because they have more money, right? Or simply because they have gone to a particular institution of learning, or simply because of any of these factors, whether racial, whether even age, right? And this is why we said the youths must also have a voice. As a matter of fact, right, had it not been for 1970, we may still be saying that you have to be 21 years of age to vote, right? As a matter of fact, NJAC was advocating as we moved into this new age of information and knowledge and learning, NJAC was saying is that sometimes the 16 and the 17-year-old are exposed to more information than our parents would have been exposed to back in that period of the 50s, the 40s, and the 50s, and even the 60s. Going forward, we have experienced, and even more so with the advent of the computer, right, and all its variants, we have experienced an explosion in information. And therefore, we were saying that younger persons having more or being exposed to more information and acquiring more knowledge should be afforded the opportunity to vote. And we said the suggestion was 16 years. However, with the Republican Constitution of 1976, that constitution brought the age the age limit from 21 to 18. Okay, and that is how you have 18-year-olds voting today. All right, but we need to. Outside of that, we were saying that the youth, they must have a voice. And yes, we agreed with the slogan that we would have encountered. Um, the youth are the future leaders of tomorrow, right? But we were not quite satisfied with that. We said that the youths are the future leaders of tomorrow today. In other words, yes, we are preparing them to take up greater responsibilities of leadership in years to come. But even today, right, they must be given a say in areas that will affect their lives in years to come.
Allow me to put you on a spot.
Yes.
My question sprung from what in your view NJAC offered that the PNM was not able in its existence in 1969, having been in power from as early as 62 moving forward. Well, we had this 56. From 1956 to 1969, the PNM had control of everything, central power.
Right.
When we look at what NJAC offered in 69 in terms of what the revolution, the ideas, and so on, the question was, what did NJAC offer that the PNM couldn't encapsulate, and what the PNM couldn't capture the imagination of the young people in the way that NJAC did? You suggested that the philosophy very often determines how one conducts oneself. Is it that you're saying that the NJAC's philosophy of inclusion of youth becoming more involved in decision making, of the people of Trinidad and Tobago controlling the commanding heights of the economy, the people of Trinidad and Tobago becoming more involved in management, in middle management? It's a revolution, not just in physical form, but in terms of ideas, in terms of education. Is it that you're saying that under the PNM, that central government prior to 69, the PNM would not have envisaged as part of its philosophy what you all represented, that the PNM were more or less about concretizing itself in governance. That they put their philosophy was about retaining political power as opposed to empowering the people.
Okay, that is one aspect of it, retaining political office, but also failing to bring a new philosophy that could transform the country. Because I spoke of a number of areas that policy of inclusion, which was very, very powerful indeed, right? Because when you sit down at an NJAC meeting in 1970, it doesn't matter what employment, what wealth, you could be a doctor, you could be a scavenger, you could be whatever it is, right? As a matter of fact, let me give you just one little point where enlightenment is concerned. Sometimes our ordinary members, with who, when I may not say ordinary, those who may not have achieved very much academically, but just by being part of the discussion, being part of the movement, beginning to read, beginning to listen, right? Sometimes somebody would ask them what university you went to. And you talk about persons who may have just reached Form 3 or Form 4, Form 5. Okay? Because that's that whole new transformation that was taking place. But also I must mention that from a national perspective and from a political perspective, NJAC emphasized three powerful principles. Okay? And it was also based on our confidence in what, as I described before, the collective genius of the population, right? The collective genius of the masses. And this is why we always emphasize the people. We always emphasize the population. We always emphasize the masses. And these are three principles that we instituted. As you would notice, we're not just saying build a bridge. We're not just saying build a new hospital. We are introducing thoughts, principles, policies, ideas that the people now could take into their communities, into their homes. It's a win-win, right? And we identified three more along the political lines. The first was mobilization. And when we say mobilization, we don't just mean having mass meetings and bringing people together. We meant preparing the population, mobilizing them, that they could organize their communities, that they could take decisions to build their homes, their families, their communities, their nation. So that they don't just have to sit down and wait for a directive coming from the leadership. So the first principle, mobilization, organize your people, bring them together, right? Secondly, consultation. In other words, we had said in no uncertain terms, should any decision which is going to affect the lives of the population in a significant or huge manner should be taken without engaging a process of consultation. It's not like saying, well, okay, I am in power, I make a decision, this is to happen. As long as you know that down the road, that decision is going to have serious ramifications, could be positive, could be negative. It doesn't matter, right? But seriously impact the lives of the population, then there need to be consultation. Today, you are hearing people talking about consultation and consultation. Before 1970, I'm not even sure that word was in the dictionary. And thirdly, we say participation. Institutions and processes like how we set up the People's Parliament must be instituted so that the population could participate more fully in the process of national affairs. And we set the example because before we went to enter any elections in 1981, which was the first time we entered electoral politics, we had about 600 consultations right across Trinidad and Tobago in every nook and cranny, so that We had about 10 teams going into different areas each night. And someone from the organization will speak, possibly for 10, 15 minutes, and then open the microphone to hear what you, the people, want, how you, the people, feel about your future, what you think about the opportunities for your children, right? And as we went along, we collected those ideas and we synchronized them into a book called the the National Policy Statement, the People's Policy Statement of Trinidad and Tobago, because it came largely from the population, right? As we traversed both Trinidad and Tobago, giving them a brief 10, 15 minutes feel of how we were thinking, then opening the microphones. And you had some very beautiful responses. Like, I think that would have been in St. James, a brother coming to the mic and saying, I am the government. You know, we the people are the government, not those who are in parliament. And we accepted that totally, that the government is the people, right? The parliamentarians, the ministers, the prime minister, they are placed there by the population to carry out the wishes of the population in achieving a better society in which all of us could pursue and often achieve our fullest potential with the resources that we have on this beautiful twin island state of Trinidad and Tobago.
In keeping with that point, are you of the view that what you just said there, that the people sitting in parliament or parliamentarians are representative of people, or that the people are making decisions? Are you of the view that the people are making decisions through their parliamentarians today? That the full fruition of that idea that you all would have had and Jack would have had in those days is being replicated today through our political structure?
It's not. It's not. You have to pay.
Okay,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, you're answering the question, because I'm not of the view that people feel that what is taking place in the parliament and the views that are being expressed are really the views of the man on the street, or it's really decision making and support being lent through our ministers in parliament, by way of transcribing and transposing their views, the views on the streets in the parliament.
Right.
What is your take on that?
You see, the point about it is that the masses of people are at a very great disadvantage, right? Because there's no organization of the people. In 1970, we were bringing the people together. They were organizing themselves in communities. They were taking part in people's parliaments. They were taking part in consultations, what have you. Okay, there was that participation of the people, and this is why we say consultation. No, we say mobilization, consultation. But the third principle is participation. They must participate. And I will just bring a little example to show you the disadvantage position of the population. Now, we know that we have an annual budget, okay, that is determined and released and what have you. And when that budget is coming along, there are certain sectors of the society that are organized under the leadership of particular interest groups, okay? And some of these interest groups are now, they represent a sector, they don't represent the population, but they are going to send messages or meetings or send their feelings to or their thoughts or their objectives or their hopes to the Minister of Finance and the Ministry of Finance, that, okay, we believe this should be done for this sector, this should be done for that sector, this sector desires this, and that another sector desires something else. And some of these sectors, I'm not saying that they will always get what they want, but their voices are there, and they oftentimes have a certain impact on the final budget. But you ask yourself, the ordinary citizen, right, from John or or Carenage or any part of the country, Caronis, Point 14, wherever it may be, who is speaking out for these persons to say, listen, this is what we want for our community, our communities, our nation, who is speaking out for the underprivileged in such circumstances. And oftentimes, no one is, right? And their voices are not, uh, therefore, a contributing factor to determining how that budget or what that eventually budget is going to look like. The most we can do, the most the masses can do, is sit back and wait for the budget to be ready and then react in terms of how they're going to um, adjust or readjust their lives based on the expectations coming out of that budget. And where NJAC is concerned, we don't think that that is the best arrangement, right? There should be the masses uh, should have, through some channel or channels, a greater or some kind of input, because in many cases, many areas have no opportunity to have any impact, much more influence on the determination of how national development, national transformation, national sustenance is going to be approached through the expenditure of the funds that will be available to our nation. Mhm. So a lot of work need to be done in that regard. A lot of changes need to be made.
Not only in that area, Mr. Mohini, what about in changes in terms of the laws of Trinidad and Tobago? Allow me to be the devil's advocate here, right? We have what we call in Trinidad and Tobago the Sedition Act. The Sedition Act indicates that, and I want to quote here, right? The Sedition Act exists.
Yes.
It's Act Chapter 1104, 136 of 1976, right? Its original formation would have dated back as far back as Act number 10 of 1920. This
Yes.
act still is on our books, and it says here, Section 3, subsection 1 says, a seditious intention is an intention to bring into hatred or contempt, or to excite disaffection against government or the Constitution as by the law established, or the House of Representatives, or the Senate, or the administration of justice. So, you in your language and us in our discussion, if it is directives are given at a certain level, we could be brought in to account for the discussion we carry here, because it is so broadly laid out that if it is a seditious intent is one that brings into hatred or contempt or excites disaffection against the government or the Constitution as by law established, or the House of Representatives or the Senate. So by us stating that we are not of the view that the parliamentarians are representing the interests of the people in the way that they should, could be deemed to be almost seditious language, that we are exciting the population against the forces that be in parliament. And with the right, I guess with the right compulsion and the right direction. And I say right very loosely, I'm being very if I may put it this way, I'm being facetious.
Right.
It's so loosely put together that one could interpret or could put interpretation to a discussion in such a way to say that you're challenging authority, challenging the state, challenging the word of the Constitution, the word of the parliamentarians, and that in itself could cause us to be brought in for questioning. So there are laws that exist on our books, and we've seen it executed accordingly. Watson Duke was arrested. Various persons were arrested over the years and brought into question, and their actions brought to question. And we've seen where, when it was challenged in the courts, a High Court judge said that the Sedition Act in its provisions doesn't belong in a modern day democracy such as ours. But the Privy Council overruled and said it's part of safe law, and therefore the law stands. So it's good law.
Well, it could stand until we change it. We are an independent nation. And the point I would make is that the we are a well, these days you have to sometimes say so-called. We are a so-called democratic country, right? Because no democratic country should have those laws on their statute, as a matter of fact. But the point about it is that in a democracy, the people, the population, are the supposed to be the authority, right? If not, why do you have elections in the first place? Because they are not voting the election, the population is not voting someone into office just because they're looking handsome or pretty, right? But they are voting them into office because they believe that this person is going to bring about changes, institute measures that they are interested in seeing instituted in our country in Trinidad and Tobago.
But that's
Right?
changes within the status quo, meaning state changes that suits their philosophy of government, not necessarily. I'm agreeing with you, but I'm saying
Yes.
that as far as they're concerned, they're implementing changes and executing changes that are in keeping with their philosophy of maintaining and retaining power. They're not implementing anything.
Let me interject.
They were not placed there to enjoy power. They were not placed there to maintain power. They were placed there to uplift the lives of the people of the country. Don't question of power in that regard. You could never place power above the wishes, above the needs, above the lives and the quality and the development of the society. Power could not go above that because you are not going there for that. That is not the purpose. That is not the intention, and that's not why people are voting. People are not voting so that our governments and individuals could go there and enjoy power. No, they are voting so that individuals could go there and implement policies and procedures and institute ways and means of spending and using the resource of the country that could benefit the development of the country as well as a better quality of living for all the people of the society, not for some fickle reason of gaining power to begin with or enjoying it, right? That is not the purpose. That is not the intent. That is not what it's all about.
David, you're about to say something.
No, what I'm going to say, I don't know who. I hope that they don't see that seditious, but is there outside influences? When I say outside, I mean outside of the governance. That we hear about election financiers and all of that. Do you think that plays an important role in a certain sector being afforded the attendance more or more facilitation from the government as per se the representation that is?
Just repeat that. That's what you said there before. There, you
I
said
said
a
that
certain.
a certain sector of the community,
Yeah.
most people seem to say benefit from whatever facilitation the government offers. Could one safely say that outside influences are controllers of governance in Trinidad and Tobago? And it takes away the true representation of these MPs for certain areas?
Well, while we might be discussing Trinidad and Tobago, right? If we extend it to the global situation, right? Where one country is saying one thing today, the in favor of this, in favor of that, they influence. You would see around the globe today that there are outside influences in most countries or in several countries in the world, right? And I would not want to believe that Trinidad and Tobago is immune. I can't say that they are being influenced, but I would not say that they are immune to something that is happening on a global.
But there's an expression, Mr. Mohini, that the borrower is the lender's slave. If it is we are looking to develop countries for money and for goodwill and for support, and we're
Right.
looking to build bilateral relations with superpowers,
Right.
then that money don't come into our hands free. There's no such thing as a free meal. There's an expression that everything that is put in your hand comes at a price. When the Americans went into Iraq, and they went and they lend their lives of their people, their soldiers, and they invest their armament, and they go there and they sacrifice. They don't do it for the betterment and the goodwill of themselves. Well, of the world. They do it for themselves. There's something they gain from a war.
Good, good, good. You are quite correct. You are quite correct on that score, and that is the nature of, whether you want to call it the environment in the world today. You know, as some people say, that's the nature of the beast. You know, and as I said, it is not easy to sidestep, to overcome, you know, or to make yourself immune, because there are influences in the world, and that is not going to stop just like that, right? And
And
oftentimes,
all politicians would be beholden to these forces that are out there for their relevance, and for them to be invited to conferences and seminars and travel the world and benefit from all these the bilateral relations.
right,
They would have to comply. They have to come home now and execute that which they were taught out there. You would have experienced some of that when you were in government.
well, not in a direct sense, you know. But the point about it is that the ideal situation, from my perspective, is you sit down, you look at where you are as a nation, where you want to be. You know you're going to have to relate to governments and institutions in different parts of the world, but you just ensure that those relationships are conducted in a manner, right, that it does not affect negatively the present or the future of your nation and your people.
All right.
That's
Gentlemen,
my perspective on it.
We want to thank you for being here today.
yes, I wish we could have another
Yeah.
part of this series.
If
There's so
Mr.
much-
Mahoney, if the three of us aren't arrested by the end of today, and we're here next week, we would continue, right?
All right, all right,
If,
all
if
right.
not, hopefully we end up in the same cell and continue the conversation.
That is a plus. That
Yes.
is a plus.
Let me say thanks to Elizabeth Bain and Bisnath Prasad, who have been commenting on the program. I want to thank you so much, Mr. Mohini, and I hope that you keep the faith and keep on spreading the word.
It has been a pleasure. It has been a pleasure. I thank you for the opportunity, and I can guarantee that the work is going to continue to enlighten our people and to seek to provide some kind of roadmap, because it's something I always used to tell my students when I was principal of Elizabeth College. I used to tell them that wherever you want to go, it doesn't matter, regardless of where you want to go, there's a road that will take you there. All you have to do is find that road.
Yes.
That is what you need to do. Just find that road. There is, under all circumstances, that road exists. You just find it. And we need to do the same thing here.
Of course. We do that at Power 102. We establish roads.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks
you.
again, everyone. Blessings to the public, and we would have another discussion on another day. Thank you again to Brother Mohini.
Thanks
And-
a lot.
And Brother
Good
Martin.
evening to the listening public as well.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen, so much. That's it for today's edition of Hard Talk under the topic 1970 Revolution, the Black Power Movement, and its relevance to Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean by extension. Hosted by Farid Ali. We'll be back next Wednesday. So stay tuned to Power 102 Digital.